Welcome to the Middlesex Moments Radio Show. I'm Dr. Anna Wasesha, president of Middlesex Community College, and joining me today is Dr. Victor Triay, who is the history professor here on the Middletown campus, and I think you may occasionally go to Meriden to teach?
I have in the past, yes.
Good.
It's been a few years, but yes,
Good.
several times.
I'm in this wonderful position of getting to meet all these new people here at Middlesex. And so last week I had a conversation with Victor, and I thought it would be wonderful to have him on the radio program today for a million different reasons. I have lots of questions to ask you.
Okay.
But I want to start with the fact that you also are a graduate of a community college.
That's right.
We were just talking about Miami-Dade. So how did you end up, well, first of all, making the transition from Florida to Connecticut? But kind of tell the listeners about your career path through colleges.
Well, I was born and raised in Miami, Florida. Went to Catholic grade school, went to Marist Brothers Catholic High School, and I went to my local community college. It's what was available. It's what was accessible to me. Not for financial reasons, but because probably nowhere else would take me probably at that stage in my life, and of course the open enrollment certainly helped me. But I have to say that while I was there, and maybe I didn't notice it right when I was there in real time, but it didn't take me long after I left to realize what a significant experience it was. It was good. It was my type of college because I'm not much of a joiner. I'm very devoted to my family, my friends, and beyond that. And it was great because I could go, take my classes, go to work. I always had a part-time job, and then I coached football in the evening in the neighborhood that I grew up in. And so I led a very responsible life. I had a lot of commitments from a very early age. Not life commitments, and my goodness, I worked my way through school or anything like that, but I had a busy life. What I always say is that, I went, all through high school. I went on and got my bachelor's degree at the University of Florida in history, and then I got my master's and PhD at Florida State University. I was in school for a very long time and in a lot of different places, but I always say absolutely the best educational experience I had, without question, was at Miami-Dade. I think the flexibility, the choices I was given, the freedom I was given, is I've never been very good when being micromanaged, and when I can make my own decisions, really was a big turnaround for me. I mean, it really, really was. I remember I sort of, there was always that regret that I didn't go, say, to the University of Florida in Gainesville, where most of my friends went after high school, which is a good distance from Miami. I mean, in Florida, distances are much longer than in Connecticut. We're talking 6 hours away. That's like driving from Middletown to Baltimore to get there. And I always felt I was missing something. And I finally went halfway through my third year. But I got to tell you, by the time I went to the University of Florida, those first 2.5 years of college, I did one semester at Florida International. I had turned myself around academically and went from being an indifferent student, and I think my whatever lack of success I might have had was more from indifference to being very interested. I didn't realize you could major in history. I thought you could only major in marketing or in accounting or in things like that. And then suddenly I had these history, and I always loved history. I mean, my whole life, my parents, we always traveled a lot. I always had an interest in it, and I realized, my goodness, I can be in this environment. I studied in Italy with Miami-Dade. I spent the semester living in the countryside in Tuscany, in a 10th century wine villa.
That
in a
sounds
story.
wonderful.
Oh, it was beyond wonderful. And in a story I'll tell you another time, of all the millions of villas within a 1 square mile area in that little corner of Italy, the one that Miami-Dade used at the time ended up being owned by distant relatives of mine from Spain, and we're not even Italian. And I discovered it after I got home, and then when I went back, I actually met the owners, who were never there, and they were. But I'll tell you that story another day because it's a long story.
What was the town?
It was outside of a little town called Rada in Chianti, in the Chianti wine country, and it was an old medieval villa, beautiful, and the nearest town was Rada. And Rada was like on the next hill. You could see Rada from the villa. The villa was in the countryside. It's the only time I've ever actually woke up in the morning in the countryside of my life, and it was magnificent. I studied in Spain the next year with Miami-Dade at at the University of Salamanca, which is the second oldest university in Europe after Bologna. And there I went more for, to party because I already spoke Spanish, so I didn't need to learn it. And had a great time. Did a lot of traveling during those years. But I mean, by the time I got out of Miami-Dade, I had work experience. I'd been in charge of certain enterprises because even though maybe I was coaching a youth football team, but I was a head coach and I was 19 years old. I mean I'd studied abroad. I'd had all these incredible experiences. I went to, but didn't run with the Bulls in Pamplona.
Thank heavens.
I think the only ones who ran were Australians, Englishmen, and Americans who'd read too much Hemingway. I didn't drink that much wine, and had all these great experiences in my life. Learned to speak a third language, and I can go on and on and on and on of everything I'd done by the time I got to the University of Florida. And I remember when I got there, I said, "Okay, I'm here. I've made it." I remember after about a few months, I was like, this is it. I really missed nothing. If I would have gone there right out of high school, I wouldn't have had a fraction of the life-shaping experiences that I had going to Miami-Dade. And it wasn't just because of Miami-Dade, but it was my lifestyle.
Right.
And then the life I was able to lead while I was going to Miami-Dade. I had wonderful professors. The environment was really low pressure. Not that it wasn't academically challenging, but I really felt I had this freedom to explore, to find what I wanted, to take certain, and then I went through this whole stage of tremendous curiosity where I would just start reading and reading and reading and reading, which is I'm embarrassed to say isn't something I did a lot of during high school. And I think I told you I even read a lot of the books I was supposed to have read in high school, which maybe I read the cliff notes for a few of them, and that was about it. And I just took this tremendous interest in history, and probably, well, even before Italy, I traveled to Europe with my parents, and that was sort of the beginning of the eye-opening experience. And I remember, reading then, but I was already at a different place intellectually than I was. That was during my first year of college, even a year prior. And so by the time, the bottom line is by the time I got out of, community college and living at home, and finally, went to Mount Athos there or whatever in Gainesville, right? Reaching those wonderful college revelry heights in the mecca of all college life. I'm not going to say I didn't have fun, but I was very underwhelmed based on everything I had already done. Yeah. And I did that all at Miami-Dade.
That's an amazing story. We have to take a break,
okay.
Although I wish we didn't have to take a break.
Me too.
And when we get back, we'll talk some more with Victor Triay,
all right.
who is our history professor here at Middlesex Community College. Well, welcome back. With me today is Victor Triay, who teaches history here at Middlesex Community College, and we've been talking about the fact that he is a graduate of Miami-Dade Community College in Florida. And you can tell if you've been listening to the first part of this program that he was completely turned on by higher education and the life of the mind. And yes. So do you have when you think back, do you have a favorite professor, or was there somebody who kind of
I would probably say that the one I became closest to was my Italian professor, Biagio Ricchio. Wonderful guy. I'm still in touch with him, but I had a lot of great history teachers there. And I always believed, I've always believed since I've been teaching, that motivation and interest is everything. If you're motivated and interested, you're going to learn. If you're not, you're not going to. I remember I took this one course, I think it was a Western Civ 1 course, with Dr. Donald Michelson. And my first semester out of high school, I didn't learn a thing. Yeah. Fast forward about a year, all of a sudden I was awake. I just come from the dead almost academically. And I took the same course again. And I learned more in that class than I think I did in any class that I've ever taken. And it was the same exact course, and he taught it. The difference was I was motivated and I was interested by that time. Right. And so I had a lot of great professors. I really, really, really did. Right. And of course the classes were small enough where you got a lot of extra help. You can go talk to the professor in his office. I remember when I went to the University of Florida, I took, I think it was an anthropology course, and it was in an auditorium, like 300 students. The professor wasn't there the first 2 weeks because she was doing research in Africa. And then when the professor finally came, she'd walk out onto the stage in all this wonderful African dress, and she'd give this talk, this lecture, but she would come from backstage like a performance.
Right.
And then she would leave again. you would never see the professor anymore.
Right.
And then you would deal with graduate students who were making their $5 or whatever an hour because they were TAs, and that's the person and it was just such a difference. I mean, it was such a change for me that I'm really glad I went to Miami-Dade. And in where I'm from, it's not that unusual. But I mean, I could list you success story after success story of community colleges, not just here, but just some that come to mind. I have a friend of mine who's a doctor, and I actually met him in Connecticut, another Miami Cuban that we met, and we became friends with him and his wife. And he came up here to do his residency in medicine, and he got a specialty in internal medicine and in pulmonology, and then went back and opened some clinics in Naples, Florida, and doing extraordinarily well. And he started his career at community college. My Uncle George, which I told you about a little while ago, became one of the youngest bank presidents in Miami when he became president of a bank, and now he's the president of a small, but I think one of the top 4 banks in Florida. Went to Miami-Dade Community College. And I mean, I can go on and on and on, just in my own family. My cousin Ralph owns a very successful CPA firm, started out at Miami-Dade.
Yeah,
I mean, and if you look at the Miami-Dade literature, you'll see Sylvester Stallone, Gloria Estefan, and with pictures of them at Miami-Dade, and I'm sure we could do the same thing here, just the number of students that I've had and who come back, who are now political figures, business owners, professionals. I think it's a great place. My wife is a student here now.
Oh.
My wife is a student here now. She went back to school. She had her degree in dietetics, nutrition, and fitness. She knows all about nutrition and applies none of it. So that's kind of our joke. She's never met a vegetable she liked, but she knows everything about it. And but she's an artist, and she's always been an artist. And we decided to go back and get your art degree. So she's here. My son's probably going to come here the year after next.
Yeah.
He's a junior in high school now, and no one will ever convince me that there's anything bad or inferior about community colleges, because I can point them to a lot of people that I know that have been extraordinarily successful in life who started out their career at a community college.
Yeah, right. Including you. And now you're you're an historian, right?
Yes.
So I want to ask, I guess I want to ask the most basic question, which is, what in your mind is history?
Oh boy,
I'm sorry to do that to you.
We jumped right to philosophy here,
I know,
right?
but I think people think, history is dates and events.
Well, no, it's not, and I think history is what the historian makes it, and there's history that's written and history that's taught in class, which can sometimes be two different things. I guess I'll answer that question by what I do in class, and I think history could be made something extraordinarily boring, or the most exciting class you've ever taken in your life, and I think history is very important. My students will tell you I teach my classes as if it was a story, and I tell them that the first day, in part not to intimidate them, and in part to create some anticipation. And you could really take that material and make a great story out of it. And if you're a good storyteller, you're going to have a lot of success in that. And so I approach it that way, and I try to put every bit of enthusiasm and passion I can into it. I think the greatest service you can do to a student, and we're always talking about how can we serve our students, and we always talk about registration and about advising, and what I think the greatest service you can do to your students is to teach them whatever you have to teach them that day as if it is the most important thing in the world. Almost like you're briefing them of an approaching nuclear bomb, right? Like this is you got to listen to this. And to do it like that every time. And if you put yourself in their position, and then yes, you could do it for 25 years, 3 times a week, the same lecture with that same enthusiasm. But you have to put yourself in their place. If you're separate from them, then you're just listening to yourself say it over and over, and you're going to bore yourself after a while. And so I try to really put a lot of passion into it, and of course there's some theatrics involved, but I have to motivate myself. And if I have this sense of urgency while I'm teaching, then that's infectious, and then that motivates me, and that motivates them, and one feeds off the other, and it pays a lot of dividends, I think.
I absolutely agree. And actually, as you were saying that, I was thinking probably the most enthusiastic professor I had in graduate school was a guy named Don McEachern, who felt that way about statistics, which is really hard to believe.
Yeah.
But he would come into classes like, I got to tell you this.
Right.
Wait
till you hear this.
Yeah, wait till you hear this. And it's like, it was...
Even though you've been telling students this for 30 years.
Yeah, right. People loved him.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I've always thought that that a teacher, an instructor, professor should always play to their strengths. We're always hearing about new teaching methods and this and that and the other, and students today and students today and students today. If you're a poor lecturer, you can still be a very good teacher. You just got to change your methods. Or if you're a very good lecturer, and that's what you should do, and you should really play to those strengths. It's like telling somebody who's very bad at math that they should be a civil engineer, or to tell somebody who has trouble thinking abstractly to study some narrow field in philosophy. And so, my philosophy, because the educational brain trust is always coming up with new methodologies and disparaging old methodologies instead of looking for what works. Are the students learning? And your style should be determined based on if the students are learning. If the students are learning, then go with it.
That's right. Yeah. Well, so, okay, you're an historian.
That's right.
And this is a little bit about what is history, but there's obviously a lot more about what is history.
Right.
But the story you tell, a lot of the story is a story of Cuba and the
Right.
Cuban exiles. And
Right.
So how did you start to formulate that story? What have you done with your books? And now you've written a novel, too, so you're telling a lot.
See, I'm very superstitious. So, no, I haven't written a novel.
Okay, all right.
No, I grew up in Miami. My parents left Cuba in 1960. So I grew up in, the Cuban exile, Cuban American community.
Right.
Most of the people, it was a middle-class suburban life, but almost everyone around me were the children of people who left in the early 60s, and so that was sort of my peer group. And so it was always in the air, it was always in the environment. Not that we paid that much attention to it as kids, it was something of our parents and grandparents, but as one becomes an adult, one gets more interested. And in fact, some even become activists who were never even born in Cuba and just sort of picking up the cause of their parents. And I developed an interest in it in high school and graduate school. Not to the degree of an activist, but certainly of an advocate, maybe. And when I was looking for a master's thesis topic, I was a Europeanist. I was going toward European history, and then because of several things that happened in Florida at Florida State, changing professors, meeting this professor, I ended up doing it in U.S. history at the very last second after years of course load in European history, and I was looking for a thesis topic, and Dr. William Rogers, who's my mentor, I saw him this summer. I drove through Tallahassee to see him, and I mentioned to him in a class I was looking for a topic to write about. And I remember I saw this Pentecostal church in Miami, a big tent revival, and that kind of caught my attention. And he said, that would make a good thesis topic. So I said, oh, okay. And so I wrote it on Cuban American Pentecostals. I didn't even know Cuban American Pentecostals existed. I was brought up in the Catholic school world. So,
Right.
And then that was just sort of my segue into the whole Cuban American thing. And then when I did my doctoral dissertation, I was looking for a topic, and I was going to do it on Al Capone in Florida. Which is very difficult to do from Connecticut because I was living here already and really sort of commuting to Tallahassee and back about 3 or 4 times a year as I was finishing. And then my brother one day tells me, out of the blue, it's funny how sometimes just a little suggestion one day can change everything. He says, why don't you do it on Operation Pedro Pan? And I said, what's that? And he said, when the kids came from Cuba by themselves. And I knew what it was, I just didn't know it had a name. And I said, there's my dissertation topic. And I went with it. Nobody had written a book about it yet, although there were like 3 in process by professional authors, PhDs at big universities. Here was a graduate student at Florida State. I remember one of the authors got a huge 6-figure grant, I think, from the Ford Foundation. I borrowed $300 from my father, but I worked and I made it my dissertation. And then after I got my PhD, then I rewrote it as a book manuscript, and I sent it to the University Press of Florida, and they loved it, and they published it in 1998. And then I always had a big interest in the Bay of Pigs invasion because I grew up in a world where a lot of the Bay of Pigs veterans were of my parents' generation, and
we're being signaled
Okay.
that we need to take a break. So,
Okay.
so we're going to take a break. And welcome back to Middlesex Moments. I'm talking today with Victor Triay, and he's a history professor here at the college, and he's written a number of books, including one called The Bay of Pigs, An Oral History of Brigade 2506. So, can you talk just a little bit about that? We don't have that many
Sure.
minutes left, but I'd
Sure.
love to hear about the Bay of Pigs.
Right. Well, like I was saying, for my generation, I think the Bay of Pigs was always a very big deal because a lot of the Bay of Pigs veterans and people were of my parents' generation, people who were in their early 20s, when they fled Cuba and came into exile. I didn't have any relatives in the invasion, but I had friends and schoolmates, and you always knew who, which father was in the Bay of Pigs invasion, but it was almost something sacred. It's something you didn't really ask about. I wouldn't have dared go to my old rowing coach for crew and ask him about the Bay of Pigs, because it was just, they'd gone through this experience. And so I was always intrigued by it. And in college, I read a couple of books about it, some of which I didn't like, and some which I did. And my closest friend's father, lost his right arm in the Bay of Pigs invasion. And I got this idea, and I was actually researching another book that just in the initial stages, and I remember, these brief moments in life which change everything. I was leaving Olin Library at Wesleyan after having done this, walking back toward my car, and then it just came together for me. I said, why not an oral history on the Bay of Pigs invasion? And so already the first book was out. The University Press of Florida was very happy with it. And then I went to Miami. It was already summertime. I went to Miami for my yearly visit, and I was actually driving back this year, and I said, well, I'm going to go up I-75 through Gainesville and meet with the University Press of Florida. So I called them. I said, I'm going to be by, which is unusual because rarely do writers ever even meet anybody in the publishing house. It's usually by phone or email or whatever. And I made an appointment. I stopped. I pitched the idea. They loved it. They said, go ahead, get started. And so I did. And for the next year, I was here researching everything, all the background. And then when I went to Miami, of course, I did all of the interviews, including many of the people I knew or whose children I knew, who I knew were in the Bay of Pigs invasion. People I would have never dared ask any questions about, like my best friend's mom, who was actually widowed 10 years after the Bay of Pigs invasion. It was a traumatic thing for all of them. And I sat with her, and for the first time, and I'd known her since I was 5 years old, and I'd never brought up the subject with her, and she gave me this great interview. I talked to other friends of mine, and then, of course, from there, it branched out to other people and contacts, and eventually it included a wide array of Bay of Pigs veterans and people involved. And then I just sort of put it all together, and it got published in 2001. And then, of course, there's the other one, which was the pictures, which we're not going to have time for, I know. Mm-hmm. And right now I'm contemplating a book on the Mariel boat lift of 1980, which my wife came on when she was 13 years old. And without her parents, by the way. They didn't let her parents leave. So she came with her brother and an uncle and aunt when she was 13. And so I'm in the initial stages of probing that mm-hmm. topic, and we'll see what happens mm-hmm. with that. And like you said, I've tried my hand at fiction. I've actually had some fiction published. I've had some short stories published many moons ago. And there's actually a Brooklyn story, which I'll tell you one day, maybe if we have more time, with Angelo Glaviano, our language professor, which is a really funny story, which we actually told somebody yesterday. But anyway, that was a short story I wrote, and I had to go to New York to read it. And so I have had a little bit of fiction published, but I am trying my hand at longer fiction. Of course, getting fiction published is a whole different ballgame. It's a whole different market. So,
but it's the same kind of. I realize it's a different ballgame, but it's another way of telling the story.
Absolutely, and it's historical fiction. So yeah, and it's kind of fun. It's kind of fun because you don't have to do a lot of the bedrock research, and so I needed to find out what it was like, for a Cuban professional baseball game, and the environment was like. Because of course, the Cuban government obliterated the pro baseball league in Cuba and put a socialist baseball league, but there was all this tradition in Cuban baseball. So I talked to my father, who grew up going to the games. There are websites on Cuban baseball, pictures, and so it was just fun, just saying, okay, I got to put these characters here. What did they see? What did they feel? And talk to a few people, go to a few websites, get a couple books, and you've got the scene. And the scene's not about Cuban baseball, but the characters are going through something at a baseball game. So those things like that it was kind of fun to write. A lot of work, but it was a lot of fun too.
I'm just enthralled by this whole conversation. I want to know more about the Bay of Pigs. I want to know about the Mariel boat lift, but our time has run out.
Oh no!
Sad to say. So I have to close by saying that this has been the Middlesex Moments radio show, and I've been visiting today with Dr. Victor Triay, who teaches history here. And boy, if I had some spare time, I would take one of his classes, and people can think about doing that. Senior citizens can do it on an audit basis. So think about coming over to visit with Dr. Triay, especially if you're interested in Cuba. And if you are interested in the college, you can visit our website at mxcc.comnet. That's COMMNET.edu. I'm Anna Wasesha, the new president at Middlesex Community College, wishing you a good day.